3, 2.
My name is Mike Iam. You're very welcome. Interviewing today Jon Cruddas, who is a candidate in the now contest for the deputy leadership of the Labour Party. Morning to you, Jon.
How are you?
I'm all right, thank you.
Just turn my phone
Just
off.
turn your phone off. There you go.
That's staying in, all right?
Jon, as I mentioned, lots of questions. In fact, we've been inundated with questions for you, which I think is an interesting pointer for you, that you clearly have begun to connect with the grassroots. Not that bloggers are per se the grassroots Labour Party, but a lot of people out there who are part of this new technology who actually, it appears, you have connected with and are very, very positive about the campaign you started to run already. But not all of them, I have to say to you. What are two questions that it'd be interesting to see your response to?
So you're not going to bowl underarm?
Not quite, no. Listen, to start off, this is a question from a fellow called John Grahams from London. What he says is that, why is it that the Conservative Party youth organisations are apparently flourishing and ours aren't? And a rider to that, he says, is it not peculiar that here's you, the only candidate for this deputy leadership contest that voted against top-up fees, but actually Labour students haven't invited you to speak at any of their events?
I didn't realise they haven't invited me. That's probably true. Well, look, I mean, there is, I think it's part of a general argument about whether we can retrieve party organisation involvement, actually, and I do think it is all retrievable, including the youth section. I mean, I was talking to someone the other day about PASOK in Greece, and they have literally over 100,000 formally involved in their youth sections. So there are models around we need to sort of learn from and reintroduce some sort of energy in terms of how we sort of engage, and I think there are models that we can transport here to help us.
Okay. JRD from the West Midlands, he wants me to ask you, what would you do to ensure, what can you do to ensure, and what should you do to ensure that the Agency Workers Bill gets passed one way or another?
Well, it's a critical issue because it crystallises so many issues of migrant workers, unscrupulous employers, and our ability to sort of provide solutions to people's insecurities at work, contemporary insecurities. We've got to keep it on the agenda, keep it percolating politically within the Labour Party, keep calling people to account, for example, over the next couple of months to see where they are on it and whether we can get a renewed commitment out of Gordon Brown in terms of his future agenda, because I think it really goes with the grain of what we need to do now, and it is a pragmatic, sensible initiative, and I think it could help to rebuild the Labour movement, actually, put some more glue back in, so it actually crystallises so many different issues and should be a priority for any leader.
Okay. Simon Morley, who has put this question down on Labourhome, wants to know your view on English city regions, and could you see them taking a significant role away from Westminster as a focus for decision making?
Yeah, I'm a bit uncomfortable with the city region model because I fear that it will just suck in or hoover in resources within those regions into the central sort of city locations. So I think there are worries about whether that is the right, precise formula for the future. I know elements within Ruth Kelly's department are very seduced by the framework. I'm slightly more cautious of it.
Okay. Sean Lloyd Webber, also on Labourhome. Interesting question. She says that how are you going to convince Gordon Brown to win back Middle England by increasing the threshold of inheritance tax to £1 million, that is effectively abolishing it for everyone up to the middle classes, and then hiking its rate from the current 40 to 80% straight away, so that the biggest source of our social injustice, that is, this is her phrase, Toff's kids starting life with a pole position, can effectively be curtailed. Would you welcome that? Would you welcome a hike from 40% to 80%?
No, I'm not taken with that. I mean, the question was, in effect, the threshold jumps up to £1 million before you start paying inheritance tax. Yeah. Well, I'm not taken by that argument at all, actually. I think we should be having a review about it. I mean, there were changes in the last budget. We should keep, a focus on it. But I don't see that as a panacea to anything, actually. I mean, I think there are massive amount we can do around the housing market, but simply jacking up the threshold to £1 million is not the solution.
You've spoken recently about the issue about housing, about the need for low-cost housing, haven't you? Do you think potentially that is a real way of the party renewing, reconnecting with the grassroots and its supporters? But do you think also it's a way potentially of securing a fourth-term Labour victory if we can get that type of issue right?
It's all angles. It's the right thing to do, just in terms of market failures, in terms of access to low-cost social housing, including council housing. Politically, it's the right thing to do in terms of it's the outstanding public policy issue in my community, for example. And I always thought it was exclusively a London phenomenon. It's not. It's everywhere, actually. And I think it's also another good example, a policy example, where we can rebuild the Labour coalition around. So, I don't see a downside to it politically, economically, socially. And actually, I think it's really good that all of the candidates are beginning to embrace the idea of housing being centre stage in terms of rebuilding the party, producing a forward pitch in terms of our contemporary policy remedies. So I'm very optimistic about it. And indeed, I was listening to Gordon Brown's announcement this morning about him being a candidate, and he put social housing centre stage. So I think it's a really good example of how we can use the next 2 months to actually reconnect by tapping into people's real material concerns.
Are you optimistic about this contest?
Really
do you think actually this contest is going to do that for us?
I do. I mean, some people think it's a sideshow and irrelevancy, the deputy leadership. I look at it completely the other way, about a way of tipping out ideas, deliberating about what the contemporary issues are, providing remedies, disagreeing, and actually having a robust exchange of views, because I think the party's crying out for it, and I think it will show to the population at large that there's a lot more energy and vitality in the mix than otherwise they assume.
Okay. Grim up north. He's not a fan, John. He's not a fan. He wants to know, he describes you as the soft left candidate, and he says, you're clearly interested that we've got a falling party membership and you want to do something about it. But he says we need a contest for the leadership, and he wants to know why you're not nominating John McDonnell in the interests of party democracy and the values that you supposedly subscribe to.
Well, I haven't said who I'm nominating, actually. I mean, I didn't say I'm not nominating John McDonnell. I didn't say I was, nor forgot. But my view is we should wait until the contest opens. I think Michael Meacham and John McDonnell haven't sorted out who's going to be the candidate anyway. So there's an element of putting the cart before the horse here. And I just think as a sort of courtesy to the membership, and a courtesy to any prospective candidates, we should wait and see what happens. Actually, a courtesy as well to Tony Blair in terms of getting the page to turn before we actually think who we're going to nominate to be the next Prime Minister. I accept his concerns.
Didn't the page turn yesterday?
Well, it did, exactly. But, I mean, we are not clear who the nominees are from which we're going to choose, So I think there is a sort of a basic democratic element of, rather than saying we need a genuine debate, but before we have that, I think X should be the leader. I think there is an element by which that should come at the back end rather than the front end of any discussion.
A number of candidates made public their support yesterday, deputy leadership candidates. You've not done that yet. Are you intending to do that?
Well, yeah, but I think that's trapped into the whole game of who's up, who's down, who's in, who's out in Westminster, really. And we as a principle, said from the outset, we're not going to get involved in putting out a list and then putting out another one and just having it a game locked into, a numbers game locked in Westminster, because the issues are much more profound than that. And actually that chokes off the party's involvement, actually. So the idea was just to tip out ideas and policies that needed to be discussed rather than exercise, who's got more nominees within a very small part of the electorate, namely 350 MPs.
Okay. J-Kit left, Labourhome. Okay. You win the deputy leadership. You are the deputy leader of the Labour Party. Gordon Brown is the leader of the Labour Party, is the Prime Minister. What's your role? Is your role to be the authentic voice of the grassroots? Mm-hmm. Is it to be an advocate for the backbenchers? What would your role be as you perceive? Because you don't want to be Deputy Prime Minister, do you? You've made that clear.
No.
So what's your primary role as the deputy leader?
You see, this is key. I mean, I would abolish the chair of the party. I think that was imposed on the party, and it is a contaminated post, actually, in the party. So, in effect, this would become the elected chair of the party, right? So the key is about rebuilding the party architecture, actually, rebuilding it from the bottom up. Actually, rebuilding a pluralist federal democracy across the whole thing in terms of reactivating our policy-making structures as well. So, basically, the fundamental job is to prepare the party for the next election, as well as articulating the views of the party to the Cabinet rather than the views of the Cabinet to the party.
Okay, that's very clear. Bill from Manchester. Bill says, why is it that you suddenly discovered your left-wing credentials when you've been a loyal Blairite?
Right, okay. Well, I mean, I think that's a pretty elusive question, really. I mean, it doesn't really define on what. I mean, look, funnily enough, I've sat in exactly the same position on labour market policy, housing policy, economic analysis, political positioning. It used to be described as on the right, and now seen on the left. I've just sat where I am. I mean, I think it's sort of reflective of a desire to put people into readily identifiable boxes, and it sort of obscures more than it clarifies that sort of question.
Okay. Red Weekin, who's from the West Midlands, he or she is fairly convinced you're going to be eliminated. You're not going to get through, and really wants to know who you're going to back when you fall out of this contest.
Well, I haven't made my mind up because I'll listen to all of the candidates, and actually it's quite funny because when I got approached to stand in this, I thought it was when I was approached by a group of union people and party people, I thought it was a lobbying exercise on another candidate. So I actually said, well, I haven't made up my mind who I want to listen to all the candidates. So I mean, that's exactly what I'll do again. I'm slightly more optimistic about our chances. No question of that.
Okay. The rest of these questions, John, are anonymous. Okay, but they're worthy, I think, of being asked because a lot of them focus on policy. Are ID cards a good idea?
Yeah, I do actually. I see a real positive case for ID cards, which is, I know this is controversial, but I see it as part of, for example, about the debate about immigration and migration. Actually, I think it is. They can be part of totally changing the terms of debate around migration and allow us to have a more progressive agenda. ID cards alongside points-based immigration system, alongside regularisation of illegal, unregularised migrants after a certain threshold of all of these, I think, could allow us to build a much more vibrant, inclusive approach to race, migration, asylum, immigration. And I know that sounds somewhat counterintuitive, but I think we have to confront issues of identity so as to actually build stable foundations to construct and defend a multicultural society.
And how do you respond to those people within our party who are opposed to them in terms of the threat to civil liberties?
Yeah, I understand that. And I think there is specifically about medical records, actually. I think that is the key in terms of whether we can actually do it in a way that doesn't threaten basic civil liberties. I would say, strangely enough, I think they could be, if we get the technology right, and that's another issue there, but they could be actually the cornerstone for a much more liberal society, strangely enough. That's how I feel.
Okay. One of the other questions we've had, which, I mean, it's interesting, you can tell a lot about a person by the company they keep and the people they admire. Which opposition MP do you most admire, and why? Or is there nobody on the opposition?
Well, that's a good question. I like Charlie Kennedy. I like Charlie Kennedy a lot, actually, partly because, I mean, I got to know him a bit, and he's a very humane bloke. I like the way he sort of acknowledged some of the things he struggled with personally. I like the way he's retained his core liberalism throughout and defended things that are often controversial and unpopular in terms of a basic civility, in terms of the conduct and respect for different traditions and ideologies and belief systems, basic sort of pluralism that I like. So I like him. Who else do I like? I don't know. I'll stop there, that's why.
That's good. Okay. What's been Tony Blair's greatest achievement as leader of this party? Not as Prime Minister, but as leader of the Labour Party.
As leader of the Labour Party, I think to propel us into a mindset where we could win elections, I think there's a danger of understating how he forced the party to confront some pretty unpalatable things that were more comfortable not to, and that will be his enduring legacy in creating a vibrant, electorally successful machine, actually, that is the modern Labour Party. And that, I think, will be his real testimony as a party leader. And that is reflected in 3 consecutive big victories on the bounce.
Yeah. You going to miss him?
Yeah, what I liked about him when I worked for him, I mean, I was way down the food chain, sort of just above the sort of office runner, really. But I mean, I quite like the fact that he never, as the Australians say, spat the dummy. He always kept a certain charm about him, and he didn't really get. His temper was always intact, which I thought was really, even in the most sort of acute pressurised situations, he retained his sort of balance and disposition and didn't sort of stomp around. It was very impressive in that sense.
Okay. How do you feel about the first past the post electoral system, and are you in favour of electoral reform?
Well, I don't like the way electoral reform is seen as a sort of preoccupation, right? I always think of it as a second order issue. I mean, I always think, is this the only form of Labour government possible? If it is, I think there are arguments for changing electoral systems if this is the only thing that the electoral system throws up, you know, in terms of the politics of Middle England, to put it better. But we will see over the next few months if a different type of Labour government is possible and still successful without having to embrace electoral reform. So I see it as a sort of second order issue. The key issue is what type of Labour government do we have and build, or is possible given the current electoral system, because there's no change in sight anyway.
Okay. You made it clear about your view about the regions. What about an English Parliament?
Never been taken with it, really. I see it as a further dismantling of the sort of federal architecture of the country, or, you know, Great Britain. So I've always swerved around it. I mean, I think it will be a growing call, though, partly the consequence of a palpable nationalism that's developing, actually. I mean, you look at the last elections last week, the BNP still secured nearly 15% of the vote when they stood in more than double the amount of seats they did the last time around. So there is this rising tide of nationalism, and I think the core to it is, as Gordon Brown will do, actually, is defend a sense of Britishness and a federalism in terms of the House of Commons.
Okay. It's difficult for people to pigeonhole you in one sense, and I think probably you quite like that. I mean, you voted against top-up fees, but you've already said to us today you were in favour of ID cards. There isn't necessarily a sort of agenda that you have and you're going to stick with. It's an issue-based, and you'll decide on those issues. Can I ask one controversial issue, which I imagine is controversial in your own constituency, and that's the issue of academies.
Right.
Where do you stand on the whole issue about the academy programme?
Again, I'm not hostile to academies in principle. I am hostile to the way they've linked into other forms of strategy. We resisted the imposition of an academy in our borough for rational reasons, that it would have removed, because it was a sixth form academy, and it would have removed the role models of especially white working class kids staying on in schools in the sixth form. So we said no. We subsequently found out we were taken off the capital programme for the Building Schools for the Future thing, and it was that thing that I thought was deeply unpalatable, actually. And I don't think you've seen any authority get Building Schools for the Future without an academy, and I think we just need a level playing field. So if it doesn't work in this area, but it works in Hackney, well, so be it. But I mean, the partnership we have at local level, I think we should be supporting and building. In our area, it's the fastest improving local authority in the country, so we should build on those partnerships rather than dismantle them and use the capital programme to dismantle them.
Okay, final question, which is my question to you, John. I'm asking all the candidates this same question, which is my own personal question, and that's this. David Blunkett, when we met him, said that in his view, the ending of selection at the age of 11 is unfinished business. Is it, and would you wish to see selection at the age of 11 by aptitude or ability to be got rid of once and for all in England? Because it doesn't exist in Scotland, it doesn't exist in Wales, and it's on the way out in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, I think there's a sort of inevitability in terms of us getting there, actually. And it's an issue that won't go away. There are outstanding issues, specifically in terms of faith schools, that come into play in that, and which I think we have to be wary of getting into a position where we're seen to be undermining faith-based education in the most successful schools in the country. But so that's the caveat I have around it. But we'll see where we end up on it. But it is a coming debate which won't go away.
Okay. Jon Cruddas, thank you very, very much for your time.
All right.
Thanks a lot. Thanks.